Random Samples, where we dive into the world of science education, featuring conversations with some of our favorite scientists, educators, science teacher educators, and passionate advocates who support the mission of the National Center for Science Education. I'm Amanda Townley, Executive Director here at NCSE. Throughout the year, we'll explore many ways in which science is taught, learned, and championed across the country, while also celebrating these individuals who make it all possible. At NCSE, we are dedicated to ensuring that science is accurate, free from ideological interference, taught in public schools nationwide accurately and with fervor. We provide resources, training, and support to educators and advocate for the importance of sound science education in the face of challenges like misinformation, disinformation, and climate change denial. Every episode of Random Samples is a chance to learn from those who are shaping the future of science and science education. And today I have the immense pleasure of talking with J. Marshall Shepard, who not only is an incredible scientist and science communicator, but an NCSE Friend of the Planet awardee, a director on our NCSE board, and a longtime mentor, colleague, and dear friend. Dr. Shepard is a renowned atmospheric scientist and advocate for science communication and education. He's presently, and correct me if I get this wrong again, the Associate Dean for Research, Scholarship, and Partnerships at the Franklin College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Georgia. And I believe you're still the director of the Atmospheric Sciences program.
Yes.
But in addition to unmeasurable accolades and incredibly prestigious awards, you're also the first UGA faculty member to be elected to the National Academy of Science, the National Academy of Engineering, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, all in the same year, and only a handful of scholars to hold that membership in all three. You're such an incredible speaker. You're featured on news outlets, informal spaces, formal spaces, and you do such passionate work to bridge the gap between really complex science and public understanding. So thank you, Marshall, for spending some time with us, and welcome.
Well, thank you. And, I'm going to try my best to be formal here because this is an important topic that we're going to discuss. But full disclosure, Amanda and I are good friends and colleagues, and she's someone that I mutually admire as well. So happy to be here.
Well, Marshall, we're thrilled to have you. And I'm going to start out, people want to know a little bit about you. So, you're in so many spaces. You've made really significant contributions, not just to atmospheric sciences, but also in science communication and in these public spaces. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your journey in those different places and spaces?
Yeah, and it starts with sixth grade science project. Can a sixth grader predict the weather? That was my science project after deciding I didn't want to do a project on honeybees because I was allergic to bee stings. And so from that point on, I won the science fair. Shout out to science fairs. We need them. They're very important for nurturing young scientists. I knew I wanted to be a meteorologist, but I didn't want to be a forecaster on TV. I was more interested in the how and why. So went on to Florida State University, got all three of my degrees, worked at NASA for 12 years as a scientist working on weather and climate satellite missions. And then an opportunity presented itself to come to the University of Georgia. And that's where I've been for the last 19 years. I can't believe it. I'm now the director of their Atmospheric Sciences program. And during that stint, Amanda, I had an opportunity to do things like be president of the American Meteorological Society,
Yes.
Host Weather Geeks for the Weather Channel, which I still do. It's a podcast now, and I occasionally write for Forbes as well. So I firmly believe that it's important to get outside of the ivory tower.
Yes. And that's the thing. The work you do outside of the ivory tower has this incredibly far reach. And you may not know this, maybe you do, but I share about you so often. So many of the things that I've heard you say, whether in conversations between the two of us, when we're talking about things like our personal marinades, listening to the unique takes you have on things like explaining the difference between a watch and a warning, or the talks that I've seen you give to teachers at conferences, or even at our My Coast event back in fall of 2024.
Which was awesome, by the way.
I'm sorry?
So that My Coast event was awesome, by the way.
It was so transformative for those teachers. So we still hear amazing things. But I'll say so much of what we heard the day that you spoke there on the island is wow, I've never heard it that way. Wow, I didn't know that. Hey, that makes so much sense. And it's the way you communicate. You connect with people in informal and formal spaces just so easily and so well. And I'm curious what feeds your drive to do what you do and engage across so many mediums to reach people about science.
So it's really interesting because at my core, I am a weather geek. I'm a science geek. I am running out, looking at storms and measuring the snow on the deck. So I guess I'm passionate about what I do. It doesn't feel like work. And so whenever you're passionate about something, you want to share it. And that's probably the initial core of the motivation. But nowadays, more so, the fact that I deal in a topical area, weather and climate, that impacts our lives in so many ways. We just had an impactful snowstorm here in the Atlanta area. And down your way, too, I imagine you got a little bit as well, more than a little bit, actually. So it's imperative that we have expertise in the spaces where people aren't. They don't read our journals. They don't go to our science conferences. In fact, I was just at the American Meteorological Society meeting in New Orleans last week, and something dawned on me. We don't do WeatherFest anymore. Before the AMS meeting, there used to be a big public sort of festival called WeatherFest that the public could come to and learn about weather and climate and participate in. They don't do it anymore. So I tweeted, bring back WeatherFest. I mean, former AMS president, bring back WeatherFest, because we are a science that people feel like they know and understand, and because they experience it. They don't experience nuclear engineering, but they experience the weather. And so there's a lot of opinions and thoughts and perspectives out there. So if I, as an expert, am not out there telling people we can't steer hurricanes into cities, or if I'm not out there saying that we can, change our weather and climate system, there will be people that will gladly fill that void that I leave behind as an expert.
Absolutely. And we really do live in a time where misinformation can spread so quickly. You're in this space all the time. And I know you and I both advocate for getting out of the ivory tower and connecting to practice, connecting to the public. What things do you say to other scientists when it comes to, how can we combat misinformation and still be really effective communicators?
Well, I wrote something for the National Academy of Engineers Perspectives a couple of months ago, and I made the case for the science popularizer. People like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan and others, they were in some cases underestimated, in some cases ridiculed as not being serious scientists because they engaged in the media and they talked to the public. I tell scholars today and colleagues, we have no choice. It's not a choice. We have to be in those spaces. It does not marginalize or reduce us as scientists. Heck, as you noted, I honestly could, I'm proud to be in those academies. I know what they mean in the sphere, but those aren't the things that drive me or define me. But what I do say is, hey, I'm in probably the highest level of honor you could achieve as a scientist or an engineer, yet I still tweet. Yes. And I still write articles, and I still go on TV. I still get a lot of grant money, and in some cases, some years, lead my department in publications. So I push back on this narrative when a colleague comes up to me and says, how do you do all this extra stuff? I don't view it as extra. I view it as fundamental to my scholarship.
No, absolutely. And, you and I have had extensive conversations about the role that scientists play, whether it's shaping policy, whether it's shaping public opinion. And as you said, if we're not out there sharing the information that's accurate, there are 100 people in line to share information that's not. And especially, in atmospheric sciences and climate change, we're looking at a $2 billion intentional disinformation industry, so it's pretty critical. And so in thinking about things like that, I always love hearing you talk about, the analogies that you come up with for connecting people. So kind of thinking on climate science and climate change. So often, like you said, pieces of this feel abstract, and we tend to internalize or measure things based on the weather that we live and we experience. And so we get these misconceptions like, oh, global warming can't be real because here in Southeast Georgia, where I'm at right now, we got 6 inches of snow. So of course, global warming can't be real. And it's like, no, 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 that's not how this works.
Right.
So with that feeling so abstract and distant for some people, how do you approach communicating those complex concepts in a way that resonates? And can you share some of your favorites with us?
It's important because, again, my wife and I were having this conversation recently. We are used to being around the people we're around. So I'm around a lot of scientists and scholars. So the perception is that's what most of America looks like. The reality is, and you know this from your family background and mine, most of the American public is not a weather or climate scientist. They don't think about these things. They just know snow is cold, so that must not mean anything to global warming, when I could actually make a very cogent case that global warming is increasing some of these extreme cold events or blizzard snowfall intensities. That's very counterintuitive to people. So I try to sort of contextualize that in my mind. And so I use sort of, my kids or my wife or people in my circle that are very intelligent people, but just aren't in my area. And, they, just sort of bounce things off of them or even sort of use them as the audience. So one of the first things I wrote in a piece in Forbes, 9 tips for communicating science to non-scientists. The first of those 9 tips is to know your audience. And so my audience, most of the time when I'm talking to someone at a basketball game or in Forbes or the Weather Channel, is not the AMS crowd. And so that's important. So, whenever someone tweets me and says, hey, Dr. Shepherd, I got 6 inches of global warming in my yard. What are y'all talking about? Whenever I get that tweet, I said, you've heard me say it. Weather is your mood. Climate is your personality. So your mood today doesn't necessarily tell me about your personality. That's one of the favorite ones because people do sort of take today's weather or this week's weather and define climate in that way. I try to point to the cognitive dissonances that are out there and the fact that someone with a straight face will tell me they don't believe climate scientists or climate models, and then in the next breath ask me what I think of the groundhog's forecast. And that's kind of what we're dealing with because that's our farmer's almanac. People are familiar with those. It's a part of their cultural marinades, even if it's not accurate. So I know just some things I've picked up over the years. People struggle with probability and uncertainty. They struggle with things that have multiple processes going on. And people will almost always try to bring something down to their level of understanding, even if it's inaccurate. We saw it with COVID. We see it with a topic you're very close to, and evolution and so forth. And so I just try to kind of meet people where they are and their value system, their level of understanding and audience, and shape and form the narratives appropriately.
And it's funny because some of the things remind me of some of the talks that I've seen you give over time. And I was actually quoting you the other day talking about how with percentages, people want to say that, scientists don't really agree on climate change. And it's like, that's like a 98, 99% agreement. And I said, so if you had a 40% chance of rain, you're walking out of the house probably with an umbrella, but 98%, 99% is not enough for you to understand that that's, or internalize that this is not just something that we're still arguing
about. That's a great point. I mean, 98%. If I told you, what's that bridge in Savannah, the one that goes over into South Carolina?
Yes.
If I told you, or anyone listening to this, there's a 98% chance that that bridge is not going to make it if you drive on it. It's going to collapse. Are you jumping on that bridge? Nope. So, and to your point, 97, 98% of published climate scientists are all on the same page. I do think, Amanda, we've gotten a little bit past that. I think from what I've seen from my lens, I think, the Six America study says that there's always going to be about 10% of the American public that's dismissive. But over the years, what I've learned is we just have to kind of tune them out because you're not going to move the needle with them anyway. You're just going to have that argument at Thanksgiving dinner with that uncle and his YouTube evidence. But most people are moving into a different space. So,
yes, and it's fantastic that we are seeing, more states, more teachers, more students demanding to learn about climate change, and it's so critically important when, as you know very well, We have other states in the country where they're removing the language or softening the language, taking climate change out and using terms like climate trends or refusing to reference climate at all. What are your thoughts relative to that? And then, especially with the misconceptions and the softening and what that means for the public.
I am a little concerned about, the space that we're in where people are sort of defining controversial topics or woke topics or those types of things. The sun rises, ice melts when you put heat to it. Water vapor, as temperature increases, more water vapor is in the air, and that can lead to greater rainfall rates. Those aren't opinions or controversy, that's physics. And so when we start sort of debating teaching physics, that's a little scary, and that's sort of getting into the world of alternative universes and E.T. and stormtroopers and Darth Vader. We enjoy those things, but they're not real. We've got to teach real science. And candidly, one of the things that I often say is the kids that are being sort of missing out on being taught true science, they're going to be at a competitive disadvantage, 10, 15, 20 years from now when they go to colleges or graduate schools or go to get jobs. And, if you're teaching alternative science and technology, you do that at the potential detriment of your own sort of citizen base.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing to me is in so many places and spaces, climate science is not an ivory tower thing. I mean, we are all, each and every day, no matter where you live, we're all being impacted. We've all got physical evidence that we can observe over, even our short lifetimes. I can tell you how many, changes have happened and things that used to be that are not. I mean, it's not something that we can just magically pretend is not there.
Right.
In looking at all of these things, the state that we get into sometimes with the politicized nature of climate science, with teaching these things, with the evidence that we have, with the rising temperature, sea level, all these different pieces, can you share a little bit with us about how do you deal with the emotional weight that comes from working in a field that's a part of climate science, where the data can sometimes paint a little bit of a bleak picture?
Yeah, and at my core, I'm an optimistic person, but I do get concerned when I see, like, for example, in 2024, we saw Hurricane Helene devastate parts of Georgia and North Carolina. And on the heels of that, we saw Hurricane Milton. I write this occasionally when I write articles in Forbes. There are these storms or events that give me this sinking pit or feeling in my stomach. And I've had that feeling a lot more in recent years because we know from the scientific literature and from National Academy studies that the DNA of climate change is in today's extreme weather events. And so this is not just academic. Hurricane Helene killed people. It destroyed life. There's still people living in tents and barely have water in parts of Asheville and the mountains of North Carolina, even colleagues in Augusta, Georgia, which was heavily hit. These are life issues. And to top that off as an African-American scientist as well, I know from some of my own studies that there are certain communities that are disproportionately vulnerable to impacts of a flood or a storm or a heat wave. Poor people, no matter what color you are, communities of color, elderly populations, children under 5. So the information that we carry and convey, either from a climate scale or even if we're predicting a Cat 5 hurricane about to slam into a populated city, that definitely carries some weight on you. And I think in our field within the AMS, for example, people are starting to recognize that there's a mental toll that's can take.
Absolutely. And, we're starting to look at, I don't know if you're familiar with the Climate Mental Health Network.
Yes.
And the work that they do and integrating those conversations in K-12 education with a lot of our teaching resources at NCSE, because we're seeing that not just with academics, as you've shared, carrying the weight of the knowledge of what's happening in the predictions, but it's now trickling down to our children. Right. And, they have so much more exposure. They have so much more information at their fingertips. So, they're carrying that weight as well. And so focusing on, the disparities, focusing on the mental health, focusing on the, different levels of action that are required, because we know that personal action is important, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. We have to have policy, we have to have reform and widespread action. So with that said, looking ahead, what do you find to be the most hope inspiring piece in climate science, and then also in science education and communication? So where are those big moments of hope that we can hold on to as we continue to fight these battles?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. That's a great question, because even now as we sit here, it's been announced that we've been pulled out of the Paris Agreement again. And that Paris Agreement's critical because it helps us to sort of reach targets to remove our emissions back down to sort of pre-industrial levels and so forth. And so when people see things like that, they may lose hope. But one of the things that inspires me is that when we saw these types of things last time, private industry, faith-based communities, municipalities, local state governments, they stepped up. And so that brings me hope. I think others, I just saw something today where I think it was Michael Bloomberg says, I want to try to figure out a way to sort of step in and fill the gaps when we leave the climate agreement. So there will be sort of push and pull. This is too big of a problem for just one tiny entity to sort of pull the lever anyhow. So that gives me hope. I'm around college age students every day on the campus of University of Georgia, and they are not as sort of affected by their marinades, their political, cultural, geographic marinades. They may have different beliefs or political perspectives, but I find that they get it for the most part on climate change, no matter how and so that's inspiring. That's hopeful for me as well. And finally, the last thing that I would say is this is a problem with a solution. We know what we need to do. So that's what really inspires me as well.
Yes. I love it. And thank you so much for sharing. This year's theme at a conference I was just at, and I really think it holds true for all of us, is fearlessness in science and in science education and in science communication. And I'll say, in defining fearlessness, it doesn't mean to do something with an absence of fear. It means to recognize fear and have the courage to do what is right, to be loud, to stomp our feet, to share our stories, and to make those connections. And I just want to say thank you to you, Marshall, for all the things you do in the many different spaces where you do them. They have a huge impact, and we're very thankful for you and other people like
you. Well, thank you. But again, I'll reverse that, because I know what you also do, and it's a team effort. After I jump off of this call, I'm headed to my son's basketball game. They'll win or lose that game as a team tonight, and we'll win or lose our planet as a team too.
Absolutely. I'm just happy to have you as a part of our team and that we get to do this work together.
Absolutely.
So thank you again so very much. And I want to thank everyone who tunes in today on Random Samples for our conversation with Marshall Shepard. I really hope it sparked your curiosity and really inspires you to learn more about the critical work that's being done to protect accurate science and accurate science education. To learn more about Marshall, you can look him up on the UGA weather site, look up Weather Geeks. You can check out our site at ncse.ngo because he has a bio there as well. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, share it with others who care about science and science education, because it really is up to us as a team to build a future where scientific literacy and accurate science education are here and are accessible to everyone. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Random Samples.